purchase of any kind of substance. And when I started Googling LSD, the search results freaked me out even more. Could it trigger psychosis? Was it possible to get stuck in a trip and never come back? At that time, deep down, I felt ready to take charge of my life. So I set my doubts aside and said yes. On Christmas Eve, there we were, Sasha and I in my apartment. We each took 150 micrograms of LSD and waited. After about 2 hours, Sasha started feeling the first effects. I felt nothing. He suggested I take a little more, so I took another 100 micrograms. Just a few minutes later, we were talking non-stop, philosophizing, and having one laughing fit after another. About 4 hours in, we probably reached the first real peak. Sasha suggested we smoke some weed. I was game for anything at that point. I only took a few puffs, but they completely changed the trip. The world around me suddenly expanded. I was falling. I sank down onto the couch and closed my eyes. But no matter if my eyes were open or shut, I always saw the same thing. I was falling deeper and deeper into an endless whirlpool of threatening colors. Everything around me spun in deep blue, red, and black. It felt like I was plunging into the infinite depths of my own mind. Sasha sat next to me, holding my hand and talking to me gently. But nothing helped. I kept falling, and the fear kept growing. That was it. I'd gone too far. This was one of those bad trips I'd read about. I was going to get stuck in it. My thoughts were barely holding together, and the fall just kept going darker and deeper. At some point, the front door opened. My roommate had come home. Strangely, I was aware of it. Her sudden presence snapped me out of the spiral just enough to make me feel self-conscious. That brief interruption, as small as it was, somehow slowed down my sense of falling. Suddenly, I heard Sasha's voice. Focus on your breathing. I realized my breathing was perfectly normal. That single thought finally softened the terrifying world around me. I was drenched in sweat, but I felt this huge wave of relief. Later, Sasha told me I'd only been lying there for about 10 minutes. To me, it felt like eternity. Once the falling finally stopped, the trip shifted into an incredibly beautiful phase, filled with vivid visual experiences. Looking back, I'm actually grateful that my first encounter with LSD was at such a high dose. Most people start small, in which case the first time can feel rather underwhelming. They end up disappointed or don't really understand what LSD is capable of. Even though the first trip pushed me to my limits, it gave me a glimpse of the entire spectrum right from the start. I'm grateful that this world opened it up to me with such a bang.
Hello, good evening. With that, I would like to welcome you all to the 5th edition of this series, which is called Substances Now or Substanzen Jetzt, where we talk about different facets of psychedelics, either therapy, research, or experiential. Before we jump into it, first of all, what we heard here was an excerpt of one of our speakers today who had a very interesting experience where he's going to tell us a bit more about. But first of all, let me introduce myself. My name is Morten Lietz. I am a psychedelic researcher from the University of Fribourg, where basically, in short, I'm currently running a clinical trial where I give LSD to people over 55 and measure their brains. So it's kind of wild that this is my day job and this is what I do after work. But yeah, so I want to share a quick anecdote with you. During my training to become a facilitator of the psychedelic experience, so basically a professional trip sitter, one of my teachers told me that if you work with psychedelics for a substantial amount of time, or with, in my case, 80 participants, it's not a question of if, but rather when someone will have a challenging experience. And yeah, that was definitely good advice, because that kind of prepares you for the eventuality. It's you can't really do everything perfect, or the person cannot be prepared up to the absolute maximum to completely eliminate the chance that this might happen. But one thing that I found really interesting was that even though someone is going through such a challenging experience in the moment, does not determine whether or not it will continue to stay this way for the rest of the trip, nor will it determine the outcome of the, well, therapy or experience itself. So I learned through that there's a lot more nuance to this than I initially thought. And yeah, today we are going to talk about this nuance, which brings us to the topic. The big question of today is there such a thing as a bad trip? And what can we learn from the psychedelic experience? And for that, we have two people up here who are going to tell us a bit more about it. So first up, there's Sario on the far end. So he is a experiential witness. He's 29 years old. He works as a designer and is also active in politics. And yeah, for almost 10 years now, he has been in contact with psychedelics, mostly LSD. And he has had a wide variety of different experiences. And he is going to tell us a bit more about, well, basically what he lived through. And then there's also Jason Day. He is a philosopher of psychedelics. He just handed in his dissertation a couple of days ago. So he's also soon to be Dr. Day. And yeah, he's going to give us a bit more on the scientific aspects, in particular about the phenomenology, such a hard word, and basically the different qualitative facets of the psychedelic experience. And yeah, so the structure of today will look as follows. First up, we're going to hear a bit more about Sario's lived experience. Then we're going to get some scientific context through Jason. Then we're going to have a bit of a conversation. And then afterwards, for probably like 25 minutes to half an hour, we're going to have questions and answers from you guys. If at any point one of us is talking too fast or not loud enough or use difficult English words that you don't understand, just make yourself known and then we try to adjust. We want to keep this for a wide audience. So yeah, with that, I'd like to give over the microphone to, well, give over the word to Sario, who is going to tell us a bit more about his experience with LSD.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yes, as you hear, that was my first LSD experience, and it was quite intense, but it opened up a extremely interesting world that I wanted to explore. I sucked in just all the information that I could find online, offline, and yeah, I started to use especially LSD regularly. I did it with friends. I did it alone in nature at home, and started to go to music festivals. And yeah, it was just extremely interesting for me to dive in this topic and everything around psychedelics. Yeah, after about a year after my first experience, I started to have kind of weird episodes, and in these episodes I experienced how body parts of mine were ripped off. For example, I just saw this visual image of myself and an arm being ripped off with lots of blood, and I didn't really know what the meaning behind those experiences, those episodes were. And yeah, those episodes lasted for 10 to 30 minutes, and they kept reappearing again and again. And yeah, with time I started to gain some methods to end them more quickly, changing the room, for example, just get away more quickly from those episodes. And yes,
I didn't really know what the meaning of those episodes were. After about a year later, I wanted to give those episodes a bit more room. So I sat down, I was home alone, and I took around 230 micrograms of LSD, which is a moderate to strong dose, depends on your personal scale. And yeah, I just wanted to give those episodes room and see where they were coming from and what's maybe the story behind those episodes. And yeah, I started with LSD, and I just listened to some music, started drawing a bit, and just enjoyed myself. And around after 5.5 hours, I noticed that the LSD peak is slowly coming to an end, and I wanted to extend this experience since I hadn't experienced any of those episodes yet. So yeah, I wanted to extend my LSD peak, and it took another 75 micrograms of LSD, and I smoked cannabis as well, because yeah, I just wanted to change things much more quicker and drastically. So yeah, as I smoked cannabis, it all overcame me, and I found myself in a childhood memory, and I was just found myself in this memory and was able to re-experience this whole memory. I was able to experience it in the first person perspective as a 6-year-old me, but I was able to experience it in a third person perspective as well. So I was able to overview this whole scene, and this memory is about my parents divorcing. And yeah, I just found myself in this childhood trauma and experienced it multiple times. And I tried to write down everything that I could as detailed as possible. And just for myself, but as well to prove to others that all this that I experienced is not just a hallucination. I tried to remember how the furniture was standing, and just tried to notice every detail, every aspect of this whole experience. And yeah, after slowly I came to a point where I noticed that I experienced everything that is in this memory, in this trauma, and I've sent the text to my mom. And a few minutes later, she called me, and she was impressed how many details I was able to tell about this memory, this trauma. And we talked for 1-2 hours, and it was just extremely fascinating and impressive how much of this experience is still there, and I wasn't aware before. And yeah, after that session or that part of the trip, I wanted to extend it even more, and I took a little more LSD just to have some space to explore what is all connected to this trauma, to this experience. Because I saw a lot of connections to my personal life, to my personality that is grounded in this childhood trauma. And I wanted to just have some room and space to explore more and all the details of that. So yes, yeah, that's kind of that story. And as a short conclusion, it was an extremely valuable experience for me. And as I've said, I wasn't aware of this trauma, that this trauma is inside me and influencing me in that or the other way. And it is extremely valuable to have this experience and just to be aware of it. And yeah, after this experience, those weird episodes just went away. I never experienced anything that was close to those episodes. I don't really know what the connection is. I have some ideas, but yeah, it's just kind of weird. Yes, that's the story.
Yeah, I think on behalf of the whole audience, yeah, I think that's an order. Yeah, I'd like to thank you for sharing this very personal, very, very, very deep experience. It always takes a bit of courage to kind of pour out your childhood trauma in front of, I don't know how many people we are today, but so yeah, thank you very much. Now that you've lived this experience, because talking about, well, is there such a thing as a bad trip? Would you say that was a bad trip?
No, not at all. It was extremely valuable, as I said. This experience itself wasn't scary at all, or yeah, not even close to scary. What I forgot to say, I was in psychotherapy after my parents divorced, and for over a decade, and I never came even close to this experience with psychotherapy. So no, I don't think so. That was a bad trip. It was maybe challenging, but at the end, I felt a huge relief. To just be able to be aware of this experience, of this trauma. Yes.
Yeah, and I think that is actually a fantastic segue to our scientific perspective, which is adjacent day, because I went through your slides, and as I'm recalling correctly, you will tell us a bit more about the differentiation between a bad trip and a challenging experience. Yeah, with that, again, a round of applause for Sario for sharing. Thank you so much. I will move over here. Jason, I'll give you some time to set up. I'll put the microphone here. And one moment.
Alrighty. As you can see on the left, you might have seen yourself like that in the mirror one time, so. Okay, I'm going to be talking about bad trips and challenging experiences. Maybe a word first on the background of where I'm coming from. I've just finished my Ph.D. research on the phenomenology of psychedelic experiences. And what I'm really interested in trying to do is mapping out the space of psychedelic experiences as they are actually lived. So I'm going to be drawing on that research today to introduce and detail what I think is a very relevant conceptual distinction: bad trips and challenging experiences. So here we go. So just the outline, I mean, what are we talking about when we talk about a trip? So we'll start there. What's a psychedelic experience? Then I think it's quite relevant to have a moment to think about the current socio-political situation around psychedelic use. And then we'll get to the conceptual distinction. What's a bad trip and what is a challenging experience? Okay, I'm sure I don't have to tell most of you in the room, but currently we're living through a so-called psychedelic renaissance, quite a boom of research and public interest in psychedelic experiences. And I mean, to begin with, it's a rather trivial definition, but most of us in the room probably understand a psychedelic experience as something induced by one of the classic psychedelics, at least. So LSD, psilocybin, mescaline, or DMT, either in the vaporized form or as a component of ayahuasca. Now, of course, it's a matter of debate how tight that classification is, but when I'm talking today, I will be talking about experiences induced by these substances. So, what is a psychedelic experience beyond just saying that it's something that happens to you when you take something called a psychedelic? I think that a psychedelic experience is not defined by any one thing. I think many of us are familiar with the idea that they're an expansion of consciousness. That's quite a popular notion. But in my opinion, that's really just one aspect. And how you can better think about it is a psychedelic experience across individuals and across sets and settings, I find, are defined really by a set of changes to experience. And there are 5 of these as I see them. The first is expansion. So think of here of seeing great vividness and detail that's truly extraordinary, being able to, for instance, access memories that you might not even know are there. So a general broadening of your awareness. But then there's also something you might call contraction. It has a positive and a negative aspect. You can think of contraction, first of all, as a narrowing of concentration, those moments when you get deeply sucked into things while you're tripping. But then there's also contraction in the sense that some aspects or possibilities and skills and capacities of your ordinary experience might be dramatically diminished while tripping. You could, thinking about the memory example, you might have memory loss. You might be able to remember something from your childhood, but forget what you were doing 2 seconds ago, or maybe even that you took a psychedelic to begin with. That happens. You can also think about things like losing your sense of space and time and your ordinary sense of self. So it's not just all about expansion. And then there's animation. Things be moving a lot. Things can move in their surfaces. Things can move to such a degree that they appear to turn into something else entirely, and things can seem to become alive. And then there's merging. That's, I think of experiences of things that usually seem or that you experience as distinct in your ordinary life, instead seeming to have loosened boundaries. Or you can even have experiences of either becoming part of something else or part of the world, or the other way around. You can have the feeling that everything is indeed you, that you're some sort of universal consciousness. You can think of the distinction here as you can either feel like the salt that gets dissolved in the water, you can have the experience of being the water into which salt dissolves. And then there's what the fuckness. This is a very serious philosophical concept I'm trying to introduce. What is what the fuckness? And this is going to be important for the discussion of bad trips and challenging experiences. What the fuckness is when you experience something that, for a variety of reasons, leaves you being able to say and think nothing except what the fuck. So there you go. Things can be, there can be so much that you don't know what to say. It can be totally overwhelming in that degree. Your experience can be changing too fast. And you can experience things that are very stable, but are so far outside your wildest imagination and language, they're just too weird to formulate a concept of them. Again, what the fuck? So, all these changes to experience are not about any particular object or content of experience. They affect anything at all. Could be your foot, could be the wall, could be a memory. They cut across all aspects of experience. So that's a little introduction. And the way you can think about it is there is a psychedelic style of experience. All these features together make up a style. Think about a style of dance, like waltz or tango. Every individual might dance the dance a little bit differently, but you can still recognize an overall style. And there'll be some variation in the style, and this will depend on the particular psychedelic you take, of course the dose, the set, the general environment, and set, other way around. Sets, your mindset, your expectancies, your psychological state, your physical state and setting, the environment, not just in the direct physical environment, I think the social environment as well. And those will affect how long the experience goes on for, how intense they are, and what the main themes of your experience might be. Okay, so imagine it like a dance that has an overall style. So, the situation, let's call it that. So currently there's a near global prohibition of psychedelics for recreational use. Recreational use is a pretty broad category. It just means anything not for research or medical application like psychotherapy. And under this UN Convention on Psychotropic Substances from 1971, they are defined as Schedule I substances. This means that they are considered to be highly addictive, highly liable to abuse, be a particularly serious threat to public health, and what that leads to is a prohibition of all use except for scientific and very limited medical purposes. Now, I won't get into the details about why that is just horrifyingly wrong on many levels, but it is good to know that this leads to a situation in which there is a great deal of misinformation and a lack of public education on the actual risks and benefits of psychedelic use. A lot of people are going into trips with hardly any knowledge, and if they had some good expectancy of what to come, they might not be thrown off the horse so dramatically. And there's a lot of lack of support. People have very strange, very overwhelming experiences, and they don't really have anyone to talk to. So consequence here is that there's very little knowledge about what bad trips are in the first place and how to deal with them. Now, I'm going to be a little bit of the annoying philosopher in the room, so to speak. And when we talk about bad trips, we've got to ask, what do we mean by bad? Are we referring to a quality of the acute lived experience? Or are we talking about a normative evaluation with respect to negative consequences? Did this experience improve someone's overall sense of well-being and their functioning, or did it have some negative consequences? Those are two very different questions. And what I want to focus on today is the most common sense of the phrase, which is the acute lived experience. It's a type of experience that you can have on psychedelics. Now, before I get into detailing what a bad trip is, just look at a few so-called adverse effects, as they are commonly referred to. When you use psychedelics, it's not uncommon that you have quite mild and transient, so quickly passing physiological side effects. You can experience increased blood pressure, heart rate, nausea, vomiting, abdominal pain, shivering, headaches, and dizziness. These usually sort of tail off as you come towards the peak, but they can hang around sometimes. And especially the nausea, sometimes that's caused by the fact that you consumed a substance like psilocybin mushrooms or a brew of ayahuasca, but it can also be the case that there's what I call phenomenal motion sickness. Your whole experience begins to move so much that you begin to feel a bit like, oh my God, what's going on? I'm a bit wobbly here. Right, so the fact of the matter is they usually dissipate not long after the beginning, and they disappear when the general effects of the psychedelics dissipate. So that's the physical side of things. But these experiences can also include feelings of anxiety, confusion, panic, paranoia, derealization, so the sense that you no longer have a grip on reality, or the world is strange or unfamiliar to you, dissociation, and fear. And once again, for the most amount of trips, these pass, or they come about in certain stages of the trips. And it is very rare for psychological and physiological adverse effects to prolong after acute effects cease. Sorry, typo there. Now, just because something might not be very common, it doesn't mean that we need to know what's going on in those cases. I think a lot of people have a lot of unnecessary suffering that gets dumped on some difficult experiences because they feel, and they've been enculturated into thinking, that if they have a rough time, they've broken their mind in some way. And that's also oftentimes the difficult experiences you can have are very difficult to put into language. But hopefully I can provide some helpful language today. So what's a bad trip? To give a sort of straightforward definition to start with, I think a bad trip can be defined as a psychedelic experience characterized by or dominated by distressing feelings. And these distressing feelings, quite simply, arise in response to dramatic changes to your experience. What does that look like? So first of all, you can be overwhelmed by all the changes to one's experience. Again, the overwhelmed sensation can come from there being a lot at once that you're not used to experiencing. Things can be happening very quickly, and things can be so strange that you find that you're unable to make sense of it, which can obviously cause some distress. Now, how things go from there really depends on one's response to the changes to experience that you're undergoing. Bad trip really kicks off. The distress rarely begins when you try to escape or resist the changes in order to return to some kind of normal state. The trouble is, the more that you focus on something when you're tripping, the more that intensifies the effect. So you kind of dig yourself deeper into the hole while you're trying to get back up back out again. So there's this feedback loop. You're overwhelmed by something that happens. Maybe you can't remember where you are. And so you try to figure out. The more you try to figure out where you are, the more confused you get because your sense of space and time is expanding and contracting. Now you feel even more lost. And there we go. And I've mentioned this a little bit already, but what is overwhelming? Well, different things are overwhelming to different people and for different reasons. First of all, there can be too much that is experienced at once. On the one hand, it can be really a fantastic part of psychedelic experiences seen as sort of incredible vividness and clarity and detail to things that really surpasses anything in your ordinary experience. But you can also feel this oversensitized, that it sort of totally floods your whole system and capacity to focus on anything at all. Then, of course, things can change way too fast. One moment you know who you are, and the next moment you don't. One moment you have a sense of having a body, and the next thing you don't. Then there can also be a lot of loss or confusion of basic certainties, concepts, and beliefs about the world and oneself. To give two examples, a very common phrase in the psychedelic subculture is what's known as ego dissolution. So broadly construed, you could say this refers to any loss of ordinary sense of self or self-consciousness. This can happen to varying degrees, and it can be experienced as deeply liberating, that you've really gotten out of the strictures of your ordinary personality, that maybe you have this sense of actually that your subjectivity, yourself is far greater, more expansive than you ever recognized. That can be lovely. But it can also be deeply distressing, because oftentimes in a lot of public media, it's very difficult to present what a psychedelic experience is like, but oftentimes people imagine that it's mainly just about visual stuff, or it's about stuff that's going on in the world. And at the very least, you still know where you are. You're a center of your experience, but that center can very much become a rabbit hole when you're tripping. And then you are without a center. A lot of distress there. And of course, derealization. We're all not even questioning the fact that we're sitting on chairs that we take to exist and that I'm someone talking to you right now. But that can get very confusing on psychedelics. You might go, I need some help from someone. And then go, are there other people? Is it just me? There you go. And like I mentioned, there's a lot going on when you're tripping. And if you try sometimes to feel more normal by pretending to be normal, like you'd be like, oh, well, you know, if I just do my normal things, I'll go take a shower. If you're tripping in your apartment, that is, I'll cook or something. And then you might discover that's quite difficult. You're often forgetting what you're doing. You're staring endlessly into the bubbling water and nothing's happening. Yeah, so you struggle to function. Now, as Morten mentioned as well, he got that good advice from a teacher of his, bad trips are simply always a possibility. That's just something that I think anybody who takes psychedelics has to accept. And again, when I'm talking about bad trips here, I'm really meaning the experience of being distressed by the overwhelming onslaught of your experience and not being able to return to normal. So the fact of the matter is that that happens. That being said, no need for paranoia. They're not prevalent, and they are, for the most part, fairly easy to avoid. Once again, it's not a perfect science. You can't forever make sure you're never going to have a bad trip. But there are some things that if you do and you take care of, you not only reduce the possibility of having a bad trip, but you actually increase the possibility of the benefits that you can experience. This has to do, first of all, with testing substances. For multiple reasons. Often substances that you have might be mixed. So you think you know what you're getting into, but you don't. And dealers do not, let's say, accurately advertise doses all the time. Unfortunately, and this goes back to why it's important to consider the political situation, Switzerland's a very special place when it comes to being able to test substances. A lot of people don't have that facility for them. But for the most part, most people get into overwhelming territory because they take way too much. And they took way too much because they didn't even really know what they were taking. 1 tab of acid, that is not a unit of measurement. Anything could be on there, right? Yeah, now it's very important I should say measuring doses, you need to measure doses appropriate to your level of experience. So I don't think that there is any right dose for anyone to take. However, you can think about it a little bit like this. You need to acclimatize to increasing your doses. So you need to learn how to stay calm at a relatively low dose, and once you're like, oh, I know the territory a little bit, then you can bump it up in sort of like, you turn the dial a little bit up. You can think about it a little bit like going to the gym. If you walked into the gym and you went immediately to the heaviest weights, you're going to injure yourself. But if you lift lighter weights over time, you'll eventually be able to lift the heavier weights. So some patience there is a good way of steering clear of the more overwhelming aspects. Then, of course, tripping in safe and comfortable settings. When your experience is undergoing so many changes, it's a bit hard to deal with if other humans are arriving with their own thing going on. So generally good to keep your setting to the people that you know. Yes, of course, perfectly fine to trip in festivals, but then the dose relative to the activity, I will say. Right. It's good to trip in a good mood and physical health, of course. It's perfectly legitimate for people to trip precisely when they're not in a good mood overall, when they're really struggling with things emotionally. But these are the cases in which it's good to have someone to sit with you if you're inexperienced. A lot of people, you'll see often it's very important to have a trip sitter. Well, relative to your level of experience, I think it is very important sometimes to go out on your own and have that experience where you don't have to worry about anybody else except yourself. But that's something that comes with time. So don't go wandering off into the wilderness if you've never wandered through the wilderness with someone else for a little while. And then it's important to know your combinations. So sometimes I refer to it as cooking. You got to know which substances mix in what ways with other substances and at what doses. So we heard a story about things really kicking off when cannabis entered the game. Weed can be quite volatile combined with psychedelics. It can dramatically intensify the psychedelic effects in a matter of a few minutes, and it can extend the trip dramatically. So it's also very important if you feel like smoking weed, when you're in your ordinary state, yeah, it might relax you a lot, but that's not how it combines with psychedelics. So it can be a very powerful tool for intensifying the experience, but it's really important to think about when you take it. So yes, do not use weed to calm down during a psychedelic experience. Only use it if you're going, I want to up the intensity. So use it in that way if you wish. Okay, so I spoke about bad trips. Now, I think it is a good distinction in our language to say they're bad trips, which are overwhelming and distressing and that you want to escape or return to your ordinary mind. But there are challenging experiences as well. Experiences are experiences where they're very difficult to go through, but that can oftentimes be precisely why you're there. Okay? All psychedelic experiences involve a degree of challenge. You're undergoing changes to experience that, for the most part, you've never experienced before, you don't have a very good understanding of. Of course, some are far more challenging than others. Some you really do have to survive. But there can be great enjoyment in surviving such crazy experiences. And this is not, I think, a particularly strange idea, because we're all familiar with the concept of extreme sports, right? People do things like free diving and free solo climbing, and they do it precisely because it's challenging. So you can seek the challenge if you wish. And what I think I'll end on this slide is really just to say, if anyone wishes to have psychedelic experiences, you just have to accept that it's going to be challenging to some degree. That's just how it is. And the acceptance that there will be challenging aspects to every psychedelic experience is a good attitude to go into any psychedelic experience with. Because if you go in hoping for the perfect, most ethereal, wonderful connection experience all the time, you are going to get a shock. However, if you had already accepted, well, I could get into some difficult stuff, it's still going to be difficult, but you're not going to be totally surprised. So, accept the challenge if you take a psychedelic. But a good point here is people who do free diving and free solo climbing, they do the challenge, but they're also skillful when it comes to accepting the challenge, right? So up your doses responsibly. And now I think this is the, to close off, one of the best reflections I've come across from good old Terence McKenna on the, the attitudes that one can have towards psychedelic experiences. So here we go. The reason I'm into all this is because I'm into what's weird. I always have been. I've always loved the bizarre, the stuff of the edge. And you know, when I got into psychedelics, I thought I'd hit the main vein of sprung verse or something. If that's what you like, then this is your answer. You see, what the psychedelic is going to do is that it's going to destroy your whole world, your whole conception of your world. And for some people, that's tremendously liberating. They say, wonderful, at last I'm free of it. Other people say, my God, now I'm hopelessly mad, I have nothing left to cling to. I've really done it this time. That's almost an aesthetic judgment. Whether you like watching your world shredded before your eyes and made into nonsense, if that makes you feel liberated and secure, then you can sign up for this carnival. If that alarms you, best to stick to the tried and true. So, moral of the story, know that it can be challenging, but learn how to deal with the challenges, and you really can do that. It's not too complicated. Yeah, thank you very much.
All right. Yeah. Thank you, Jason, for this very interesting and nuanced talk about what to do, what not to do, how to kind of manage these very interesting substances in a way. So first off, I'd like to start with a question for the both of you. So you said a bit about what you can do before going into the experience to kind of, reduce the risk of having a hard time. But now I'm wondering, also, this is probably something you can tell a bit on, like once you're already in the shits, what would you recommend? What can you do, or what can a trip sitter do who's with you in that moment in order to kind of help you navigate, if that is even possible? And whoever would like to start, go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, I think there's no way out. There's only a way through. And I think in my experience, breathing through the experience is just one of the best methods. To get through safely, and don't resist. Don't try to avoid anything. Just give yourself to the experience. I think that's one of my number one rules. Sometimes it helps to maybe change the setting or change the room, maybe change type of conversation, the topic you're talking about with friends. Kind of.
Well, let's see. The first comment I might have is I spoke a little bit about cultivating a good attitude. A good attitude to cultivate beforehand, so that we're all familiar with the concept of a mantra. Sometimes when you're tripping very hard, you want to try to have one thought that is going to be highly effective if you manage to have it. And one of those thoughts that is very good is that it doesn't make sense what's going on. And you don't need to make sense of it. A lot of the distress comes from experiencing things you can't make sense of it, and the fact that you can't freaks you out. So that's a bit more of an abstract piece of advice. But otherwise, it's also important, and this has to do with the preparation. Sometimes people can think that they're having a really bad time when they just haven't drunk any water for 5-6 hours. So it's always good to take care of those sort of things all the time. And otherwise, a lot of sort of distress is held in the body when you're going through these intense experiences. So trying to not just sort of lie down and take it, but also try and make some rhythmic movements sometimes gives you a bit of a center when you've lost your center from which you can peer out at. So introducing some slow bodily rhythmic movements can help to calm you down as well. Yeah, that's some tips.
Also what you said kind of resonated with an experience I had with a participant. The pants were too warm. So really just changing the pants, opening the window, cooling the body down already did a lot. So yeah, there are many different ways one can try to make it better, kind of identifying where something like discomfort might come from is one way. Yeah, but also like one thing that I have also, especially when it's a bit more challenging and all these things don't work, one thing that I try in working with participants is to kind of turn the process in which they're currently being basically just like not the person in charge, being the completely out of control, not able to manage the situation at all, kind of try to encourage them to whatever's going on, turn that into something that gives them a sense of agency. So when somebody is, for example, just like breathing like, fuck, oh my God, I try to encourage them like, yes, keep breathing, breathe louder, make some noise, like, whoo, whoo, and kind of it turns into almost something that sounds like somebody giving birth. And by doing that, like being this bodily reaction of this intense experience that is involuntarily turns into something that has agency and something that moves into a certain direction, which basically gives them the sense of agency back, which sometimes helps a little bit. But again, there's no one solution for this super complex. Yeah. But you mentioned in your beginning that throughout the years you kind of learned how to manage a bit. You do some rituals before you kind of prepare yourself in a certain way. I was wondering whether you would like to expand on that a little bit more.
Yeah, just a preparation part, or
Both,
okay.
like preparation and during, yeah.
Yeah, just I try to. It depends in which setting I take those substances. When I do it with the intention to dive into myself, into my psyche, and explore inner things, inner thoughts. Yeah, I just try to start with a meditation. I try to set some, just goals. Maybe if you can frame it like that. Just somehow prepare myself for the things that I can't really prepare, because as we hear, you don't really know what's going to happen. My experience I spoke about, that was just a surprise. I didn't really know what's going to happen. I just wanted to give those weird episodes more room, some space, but at the end of the day, I didn't know what's going to happen. So I think best preparation is just to have a safe setting, to have as much time as you can. I have to the rule for myself to reserve at least 48 hours if I take any substance, just to give myself space to explore and to calm down, and just have the space that I maybe need.
Talking about the space, especially the what comes after such an intense experience like the one you described, for example, and this goes to both of you again. So what do you think is necessary to turn an, subjectively bad trip acutely into like a more challenging experience, and now focusing on the aftercare? So what happens after? What can one do in order to make sense of what happened and maybe gain something from it other than what the fuck, to put it in your words? Very technical.
Okay, so the question is how can one deal with these experiences after the fact? I think it's very good to have something or cultivate something I might call story consciousness. What do I mean by this? It is very helpful, although of course it's very difficult to remember and describe your experiences, to sit down the day afterwards or when you have time and just write down as much as you can remember, with the idea not being that you create the most brilliant description that's ever been written of some strange aspect of the experience, but really just putting it down in writing
and then finishing your little report and closing it is a really good way of processing it. Otherwise, some of these experiences can stick in your mind all the time because you've not given it any outlet, any expression. So on that point, so the first is tell your story, even if you keep it to yourself, that helps you to deal with it. And also, I think it's good to remember that if you take psychedelics, some weird things are going to happen. You're going to try and make sense of it, and sometimes you're going to come up with some crazy stories. I think it's healthy to remember that they're the best stories you could come up with. Yeah, I'll just say that.
Yeah, I think in my experience, it's easier to journal when you are tripping, when you experience it, because there's happening so much in a short period of time. So for me, it's kind of hard to sit down a day after and trying to reconstruct what happened. So when I'm able to, I try to journal when I'm in the experience itself, but as well after that, I try to after calming down, maybe I try to make sense of my words that I wrote down. But yeah, maybe creative expression is a really good way to deal with all those experiences as well for me, and as well sharing with good friends, or anyone that you feel close to, can be extremely valuable.
Yeah, having an understanding community is probably the best thing that you can have. Yeah. Can I add one point on that really quick? One thing I do want to add as well is there are some things that you're never going to be able to fit back into your life. Sometimes you are just going to have experiences that you don't really get anything out of, and that's okay as well. You don't have to tie yourself into knots being like, oh my God, how am I ever going to integrate that? Sometimes stuff just happens.
Yeah, thank you guys. So question for you, Sario. Like, after you went through such a challenging experience for the very first time, I can imagine that there must have been a lot of confusion. What do I do with this? How do I kind of frame that? Is there maybe like a concept that fits your experience? I think Jason offered a bit of that. Did you also do your own research, and what kind of framework would you put your experience in?
Yeah, what helps me is this perinatal matrices from Stanislav Grof. Maybe you know those 4 phases. I don't really want to dive into the perinatal matrices itself, but into those 4 phases that I think are helpful for myself. First phase is this oceanic bliss. You feel unity, you feel connected to the whole universe. Phase 2 is you feel kind of there's no exit. You start seeing pain, or it's just getting harder, or you just have strong anxieties. And phase 3 is where the war happens. Where things are extremely bad and negative. And phase 4 is the rebirth itself, or you feel reborn, this rejuvenation that you sometimes feel. And those 4 phases just help me while navigating in challenging moments to see where maybe in which phase I'm maybe stuck, and what can happen next. And sometimes I think, or in my experience, it sometimes helped to just, as we already covered, to change a thing, just to change a room, or as you said, open a window. That sometimes helps to proceed to the next stage, to the next phase.
All right. Yeah, then I think, we have. I would like to ask you one final question, which is basically the topic of today. So, do you think there is a bad trip? Is there a bad trip?
I can't imagine that one can have a debate on it. It seems obvious, yes.
Thank you, but I hate panel discussions when there's a question and nobody actually asked the question. So that's why why I wanted to do that. So, what's your opinion on that matter?
Yeah, in my opinion is that there is no bad trip. There are only challenging experience, but I see this point that sometimes experiences are extremely weird and you can't really make a sense out of it. But yeah, as I experienced it, all those bad experiences or challenging experiences lead to insights that can be valuable. Sometimes they're just challenging and you don't really get something out of it. But at the end of the day, you experience something that is inside you that maybe you already have and you were not aware of it. So, yeah.
All right. Yeah, with that, thank you so much for this panel discussion. Now I would like to open the floor to the audience. Yes, we have a question over there. Oh, there's a microphone. Is that possible with a cable? Okay. Oh, God.
Hello? Oh, so schön. Okay. I heard a lot of bad trips and wie sagt man? Wenig.
Oh, it's also okay if you ask the question in German and I can
Gut.
translate.
Ja, ja, sehr gut.
Yeah.
Also ich habe ganz viel gehört über schlechte Trip und für mich, warum man es nicht machen soll. Jetzt hätte ich gerne noch etwas, wo du schon angefangen hast mit dem weißen Pulli. Jetzt gerade am Schluss, was sind denn überhaupt die Benefits, die ich könnte bekommen, wenn ich mich dann mal entscheide, so etwas zu mir zu nehmen? Also wirklich, das interessiert mich sehr.
Yeah, who would like to take the question? Oh, so sorry, of course, I need to not only translate for him, but for the rest. So the question was basically, we talked a lot about bad trips, but what are actually the benefits of psychedelics? Right? Yes.
Sure. I mean, there's no one benefit. I'll say this. It depends on why you are using them. So, on the one hand, you might find great benefit in it being something that produces a lot of fun and adventure. On the other hand, you might use it to aid your creative processes, as a lot of people do. On a whole, the first point is that there's so many different ways you can use psychedelics that there's no one benefit for all people. I think everybody should figure out their way, their style of using it if they want to. But if I were to say something more general, I think the benefit is in gaining a new way of being, a new perspective, and exploring that. We, I think, don't even have a good grasp on what the harms and benefits of our ordinary state of mind are if we never get outside of it. So giving yourself a new space of mind and body, I think, is a big sphere of possibilities, and then everyone can find out for themselves which possibilities they are most drawn to. I would say that. I hope that answers. Yeah.
Yeah, sometimes I just want to add to it that sometimes it's just extremely fun to experience the world in just an extremely different way than you experience it in your everyday life. Yeah.
And
Also, nur eine kurze Anschlussfrage. Ich habe, glaube ich, etwas in dem Fall nicht verstanden. Ich könnte also sagen, ich möchte ein Trauma lösen mit LSD und dann geht das.
So to translate the question, so does that mean that if you have a trauma, you can take LSD and that's it? So as the I'd like to give some clinical and research perspective on that. So LSD can be used in trauma therapy, but especially when you deal with trauma, it is possible to work on it on your own, but I would definitely advise to go talk to a therapist, because here in Switzerland we have the limited medical use program, so there are actually legal, proper medical systems in place where people can go for therapeutic reasons. especially when it comes to trauma, I think it's really important to take that with a certain level of how do you say, salt. It can bring back the trauma when you're in a state in which you can't really deal with that in that very intense moment. It might do a bit more harm than good. However, if you utilize these substances, they're sometimes called a catalyst for change. It might bring you to the very core of something, but you need to be able to deal with that in that moment. And I advise to do that in collaboration with a therapist.
Yeah, and as you heard before, it took me almost 2 or more years to get to this point where I was able to re-experience this trauma. So it's not just the fact that you take one dosage of LSD and you re-experience all your traumas, and that's it.
All right, next question.
I like to add something or to ask something to this. Closer? Oh, okay. As I know, the brain of younger people, like you are, and maybe a brain of a bit an older person, function different on these substances, especially when it's not trained. Can you add something to this?
If I may take that question. So, I mean, I am running the clinical trial on giving LSD to people over 55. So, from all my experience with both supervising young people during that trip as well as people after a certain age, I also get the impression that the experiential effects are different. So in the younger adult group, it's mostly it's a lot more perceptual. So it's a lot more dealing with the perceptual changes, being a bit more distracted, but also more easily overwhelmed. And I think that has to do a bit with a sense of self not being fully cemented in a way. Like there's still a lot of dynamics, especially let's say you are a student, you haven't started your career yet, you don't really have started a family or even thinking about it. There's still so many moving parts, and then adding this explosive mix of psychedelics into that just brings more dynamic into an already dynamic system. Whereas when you are already at the end of your career, maybe already in retirement, you have had kids, you have had grandkids, you've seen some shit. And you know how to deal with that, and you're still standing, and it's very beautiful to see exactly what happens when you add psychedelics into that mix, because I'm surprised to see how deep my participants sometimes go, and what kind of stuff they face, and they look at their mortality, they look at basically the whole life, the richness of it all that they have lived. It's very emotional. It's not that perceptual. It goes to a very core of being human, who lived a full life, which I found incredibly inspiring. And so a friend of mine asked me, so would you say that LSD is wasted on the young? In the beginning, I would say, no, of course not, but kind of. I do see some qualitative differences there, and especially in transitional periods, I think it's really beautiful what these substances can do. Like, can really help you find into a new role, can help you face new realities. Like, especially when you are at the end of your life, you kind of have to look at what comes next, and doing that is a very scary thing and very confronting. And when it happens, and you come out of it, it's beautiful. Yeah. So thank you for that question. Would you guys like to add something?
Yeah,
Sorry for the monologue.
I can add. Well, first of all, interesting point there, but I think I'm not aware of any systematic research with regard to age differences. And
well, I'm the first one.
Yeah, so get moving. But I would say certainly it seems that the themes of the experience might be different. At least in my research, the most basic changes to experience cut across age, but the themes will certainly be different. As to the value that people might get out of it at different ages, I'll just say it can be valuable earlier on in life to be presented with different ways of thinking and being as well. So I would say that there's no right age to take it. Yeah.
Yeah,
But,
yeah. I agree. Okay. Yes. Yeah. You can just pick. I don't care. I can't see you anyways. Like. It's
So talking about tripping in safe, more like this. Yes. Okay. So talking about tripping in safe and comfortable settings, I think it's a bit a complex question. But what would you consider specifically as a good setting? Because I feel like in the time where the psychedelics become more accepted somehow, and through medicalization, it's still an aspect that it's mentioned a lot, but there is very little research about what a good setting really is, although the common knowledge is surely there. And so what do you think is a good setting, and is this medical setting of a psychiatric room? I'm not talking, it's not psychiatry, I know, it's like this nice room with a plant and a chair, no?
I'm agreeing with you. Like,
that was the question. Is that a good room, or what would be a good room, or what could be improved or learned from this common knowledge?
Yeah, I think in my personal experience, best place to take psychedelics is in nature. I feel when I am at home, I feel kind of boxed in those rooms, and in my personal experience, I had just the most valuable experiences outside in nature, and just feeling this connection. And if I can choose, I do it outside, somewhere where I don't see any other people, or only those I chose before taking this substance.
Yeah, well, in my opinion, there is no right or best setting to take psychedelics. It depends why you want to take them and at what dose you're taking them. So if you want to appreciate nature, then of course a forest is a good place to be. But then it's important how much of a dose you're taking. If you want to really explore the far reaches of weirdness, then you probably want to be in a closed environment. So I think just modulating one's dose relative to the activity that you plan to engage in is the trick. So I don't think the right setting is exhausted by the current clinical model, but that can be a good space when people are trying to deal with trauma. So again, that's relative to what people want to do with it, right? Yeah.
And to, where are you? There. To directly answer your question about, like, so in the psychiatry office, do you think that's a good setting? Well, you kind of make the best out of the facilities that are offered. Like I do this in a mental hospital, and we did put a lot of effort into making the room nice, but it's still a hospital room, and you're still at a mental institute. So there are people outside who start screaming. There are people who bang their heads at the wall in the next room over. So, but at the same time, if I have a participant who feels like screaming too, that's completely fine, and I don't need to worry about anyone calling the police or anything. So, because like. I did facilitate a trip with a person in a non-regulated context, and then, well, there was a lot of screaming involved, and then you're kind of like, neighbors, fuck. Yeah, it really depends on the dose and what you want to do, and yeah, ultimately, I think like the personal question, what would be a good setting, is like, what would be a good setting for you? Where do you feel comfortable normally? Where would you be completely happy to run around just in your underwear, for example? Like, because that might happen if you get too warm. I don't know. And if an idea of what that might mean comes in mind, then I think that is a good point to start off with when you want to take psychedelics too. Yeah.
Yeah, you were talking about a lot about bad trips where things get overwhelming. And for me, one aspect that got a little bit neglected is paranoia. So in my experience, the trips that are the most difficult to handle is when people get really paranoid. They might think people talk about them, talk shit about them, to a point where they even distrust close friends. For me, that was really difficult to handle when a friend of mine experienced this. What would you advise in such a situation?
That's a very good question, because I think paranoia, like once a person in your care is starting to get paranoid, it's extremely difficult because basically the therapeutic alliance is broken in that sense. Like there's no trust anymore. So that person kind of might have this belief that everything you do is to hurt them, or you don't really care what's going on in them, and it's really, really difficult to get them back. But I think the first step is to try to rebuild the rapport, like really kind of trying to make him understand. Dude, whatever you do, you're completely free. I'm just here to help, man. I just go along. I don't have any negative intentions. I don't actually have that many intentions at all. But yeah, it's very dicey. It's very difficult. And one thing you can do is play for time as well. Kind of like, okay, it's fine that you don't trust me. Want to watch some want to watch some TV, or like just kind of find a way to keep the time passing and hope for it to just fall back. So there was a scenario where that didn't happen to me, but to one of my colleagues. And she did kind of play for time, got the partner involved. And by the time the partner arrived, that person was completely happy again. It shifted away after an hour. And at the end of the day, he would be like, yeah, was a bit difficult, but 10 out of 10 can recommend, would do again. So she was struggling a lot more with that experience afterwards than he was actually. So I'm not a therapist. I'm usually just working with people who are healthy, so I can't really give proper medical advice in that sense, but it's very difficult.
Yeah, I mean, you probably have the best input out of us here, but I would say it seems also to be the case that when people slip into paranoid states, these paranoid states have peaks and valleys, and it's very difficult, but it's good to try and observe when those peaks are happening. When people get into a moment of slightly lower paranoia is oftentimes the time where you have a space to re-interest them in something in the trip, like, oh, take a look at the patterns on the table or something like that. And getting them to pause on something can give you a little bit of a moment to manage things, change the music, to something like a very calm, not intrusive post-classical piano, for instance, and really just being there to be a helper. Just be like, are you thirsty? Just things like that. Not being like, look, you need to calm down, and don't. Also, it sometimes can make things worse when you try and tell them like, look, everything's fine, nothing's. Yeah, so almost you don't need to have any comment on their experience. Just give them water, manage the music, try and refocus them on things of interest. I think that's all I could say on that matter. But yeah, it's really difficult.
Since we're talking about difficult situations, can you elaborate a bit more about like the risk of like proper psychosis? What's the like scientific evidence right now, and or is it just an urban legend that this can actually happen? Thanks.
I've done some research into this topic. First of all, there are cases where you see psychopathological symptoms occurring after psychedelic experiences. In most of those cases, they are multifactorial, meaning that people oftentimes had pre-existing diagnoses or symptoms. There was polysubstance use, mixing. So the first thing is that it is very rare for people to experience psychopathological symptoms, let alone psychotic symptoms after just one psychedelic experience. Usually there's some history behind it. There are very few cases in which someone didn't have anything else going on and had a pretty standard psychedelic experience and then psychosis occurred. So it's not impossible, but it is very rare. But there's not a massive amount of research into it, unfortunately. But that's changing. People are starting to look into these things more. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, just purely from an ethical perspective, it's quite difficult to kind of, well, get an idea of does giving psychedelics to people induce psychosis? If that's the research question, well, doesn't really fly well with the ethics board for good reasons. But yeah, also for our clinical trials, it's fairly standard practice to exclude people with like either an own history of psychotic episodes or a family history, even so to also account for the genetic components that sometimes play a role in psychosis. But yeah, as Jason pointed out correctly, it's extremely hard to get proper data on the subject. Yeah. So science is a bit more on the cautious side of things here to just minimize the risk of this happening, because you don't want to be responsible for.
Hello, I'd like to add a question or an aspect to the question of the comfortable setting, according to the question before. We were talking now a lot about individuality or individual experiences, and I would be, as personally, I am much more familiar with the group experience. I would be interested in Sario, if I could ask you directly if you have group experiences and if you felt them as helpful or more challenging, or if what is your personal experience with that? And the question if there are clinical researches or results about this topic.
Yeah, in my experience, group experiences can be extremely interesting and valuable for friendship itself, but it depends on people. I had multiple experiences with extremely close and good friends, but I had experiences too with people I didn't really know, and those experiences with people you don't really know can be sometimes challenging, because you don't really know how those people behave and how they behave when they are on those substances, and this can be challenging just because sometimes you don't really feel that comfortable by yourself, and sometimes I didn't really feel comfortable to share all my thoughts with those people. But as well, as I said, with close friends, it can be extremely wonderful experiences. You can kind of experience the same setting and experience, for example, beautiful nature and mountains, and you just have a wonderful time with your friends, and maybe share some deep thoughts or show your love to your friends. So yeah, I think there are both sides, and if I could choose, I probably would do it only with friends that I know good or extremely good.
And if I'd like to add to that a bit, because like currently here in Switzerland, it's like it's quite common to either do group therapy with psychedelics, because it's quite hard to get the insurance to pay for the substance, the hours. So like one way to circumvent that is basically to have like two therapists and like a group of 6 to 8 people, more or less. And so the interesting thing I learned there, I just later found out, no, this is just like generally how group therapy works, like regardless of substance, yes or no. Like as the therapist, you don't really tell the group what's supposed to happen, but you rather orchestrate an environment in which the group kind of helps each other, because one shared commonality between different types of mental disorders is social isolation. At the end of it, you're lonely because you isolate yourself, because partaking in normal social activities becomes too much at some point. And being now in this group setting, where, well, half of the people usually are on MDMA, the other half are on other psychedelics, like you can kind of create the sense of we are in this together. There's a lot of shared humanity that's going around. And yeah, also afterwards, when it comes to the integration, everyone is so open and really listening, like really, really listening. And yeah, that just creates a very, very healing space for a lot of people. And ultimately, like some people keep in touch, and then you start to have this, well, shared group of people where you can share the super weird, super interesting experience with, because sometimes you don't have that when you're not like in the psychedelic bubble and you're not completely open to talk about these, because that can also isolate if you actually take psychedelics and nobody else in your friend group ever tried, or maybe they're even judgmental about it, and then you don't have anyone to share that with, and that can also make you very lonely because it's a very intense thing. Yeah.
Yeah, I want to add something to that. In my experience, all those experiences I had alone were just much more focused on myself. When I took it with friends, I didn't really have the chance to dive into my inner self, into my psyche, into my thoughts. I was more focused outwards on what things, what other people were doing. We had a common talk, or we're talking together, and I didn't really have the chance to really focus on myself and what was going on. So the most insights I had alone, as I said before, this second experience you heard was alone, and I think it wouldn't be possible to do it with someone else. I think that was just right to do it by myself. Yes.
I think we have time for one final question.
Yes, and my question is about bad trips and or challenging experiences, whatever you want to call it.
I think you're in the right place.
They can be very, very, very profound, and they can be very healing, and arguably even more healing, profound, and educational, so to speak, than the good trips. How do you direct a person who is going through the bad trip, or rather, how would that person direct their bad trip to that positive side? How do we cope with a bad trip and turn it into something awesome?
I don't really have a recipe for that. My recipe is just to give those experiences the room they need, they take up, and yeah, that's all I can say.
I mean, yeah, no recipe, as you said. However, I think oftentimes when people are feeling especially overwhelmed, not able to make any sense of the situation, you would think it sounds counterintuitive at first, but saying to someone, it doesn't really make sense, does it? Can be very helpful. And then it is possible to enjoy the fact that it doesn't make sense, but it can sometimes be helpful for the person to hear that it doesn't make sense. Otherwise, they feel like they are totally lost from the world in their own mind. So I think trying to facilitate wherever you can some enjoyment in the overwhelming fact of the matter. Sometimes it could also be something like, yeah, it doesn't make any sense and it's pretty crazy, but this is pretty special. We haven't really experienced that before, and we can be grateful for it, even if it's a bit too much. So yeah, trying to find, and it'll differ from person to person. You really have to be sensitive and have to try some stuff out. Like, do we want to try listen to some music, or it's on a person-to-person basis, but trying to pick up where there is space for enjoyment and acknowledge the fact that it's overwhelming can be helpful. Yeah, that's what I would say. Yeah.
And just one more thing I'd like to add to this is, again, doesn't work for everyone, and I don't even like to give that as an advice, even though I know sometimes it works. It's really like, let go, stop fighting, or not say stop fighting, because like try to let go, like give an offer to the person like, yo, this doesn't make any sense. Doesn't need to. Maybe it doesn't need to. Maybe if you just let experience slip away, you'll see where you wash up at the end of it all. Like that's also one thing I prepare my participants with, by literally telling, sometimes if it gets too much, imagine you're in a river and you're holding on to a rock, and that's really, really difficult, or you're swimming against the current. That's terrifying, but if you just let go and you just let yourself carry away and kind of see when stuff starts making sense again, you come back to something that you can grasp. Yeah, you can kind of rebuild from that. Interestingly, most of the time people let go, they kind of like not form any memories of it. It's also strange, weird.
Yeah, but I want to encourage everyone to have that openness and this humility, but as well the respect to those substances. Yes.
Yeah, I think Jason pointed that out quite nicely. Like, if you go to the gym, don't be a dickhead. All right, and I think with that, I would like to close today. Before we do, a bit of advertisement. So, Substanzen Jetzt is gonna have a bit of a break over the summer. They will be back on the 26th of September. And a topic I'm also very interested in, it's about psychedelics in the second half of your life. So basically psychedelics in palliative care or psychedelics in older age groups. And also on that regard, so I put up a bunch of flyers. So if you know someone who might be interested, there's more information on those and you can send me an email. All right, thank you so much, guys, for your questions and for being here tonight. And also thank you two for being here with me on stage.